Hello, guys, and welcome back to another episode of the ADHD Dads. I'm your host, CJ.
And I'm JJ.
And today we've got a very special guest. I'm really excited to welcome Kristen Carter, and that's Carter with a D, not a T, to our podcast. She has her own podcast, which I've been listening to and becoming a big fan of. It's called I Have ADHD. She's an ADHD coach. She's been studying the topic for the last 10 years, helping adults with all of their wonderful ADHD problems that we all know about. And she has her own program called Focus, which helps them kind of organize, structure, cope, and deal. So I'm really excited to have Kristen here. And, when I first listened to your podcast, Kristen, I was ready to put on the verbal boxing gloves to defend my title as world's greatest dad for using the term superpower with my kid. So I want to dive into that with you. I have some questions. But by the end of that podcast, it really resonated with me because it's true. But we'll talk about that. I want to hear from you first. I want to hear about your life and your family and where you're from and what life looked like growing up for you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here. I love conversations. I love talking about ADHD. I want to do this all day, every day. So happy to be here. So you want to hear about all the things? Yeah.
Yes, all of the things, please.
Okay,
Let's start with when did you get diagnosed with ADHD? What did that journey look like for you?
I was diagnosed in my early 20s. I think I was about 21 years old. And the journey looked like my dad reading Ned Hallowell's groundbreaking book, Driven to Distraction, in the 90s. And my dad subsequently getting diagnosed and medicated for ADHD and then nagging me for a couple years about my own tendencies and quirks. And, when you're 16, 17, 18, you're just like, whatever, Dad, you don't know anything. And so it wasn't until I was in college, I was double majoring, I was drowning. I was getting A's and F's, really excelling in some courses and really bombing in others. I was struggling with massive amounts of anxiety, depression. I had some disordered eating happening. It was just like a hot mess express. And so I remember calling my mom and saying, like, Dad mentioned this thing a while ago, like maybe this is something that we would want to look into. And so I went and got what was a joke of an evaluation. It was not thorough. It was not concise. But it was accurate. Thank God. So I feel very privileged to be a woman who has a diagnosis early in her 20s. That's so rare. And so, I went right on a stimulant and it changed my life. Obviously, pills don't teach skills. So there was a lot more learning to happen that needed to happen. But there was a marked difference when I started treating it, for sure.
Yeah, I was just talking to JJ about this, and because I've recently been diagnosed in the last year. I'm 36 years old, and I started my journey because our 7-year-old at the time was showing some signs of it, and we were thinking about getting her evaluated. And I said, God, I think I've always kind of had this too, but my parents were so kind of apprehensive to therapy and medication, so it was never acknowledged or looked into. But I always had that in the back of my mind. And the more that we dove into research with my daughter, I was just, this really is kind of hitting me. So I wanted to go on that journey myself. And medication was like night and day for me. I know a lot of opinions are out there about whether to take it or not to take it. It's been night and day for me. And just, like you said, there, it's skills, not pills, but which I love that. Cause it's for me, it's both. And maybe for somebody it is just the skills. It's all right. Don't worry about it. Just,
I literally, it's my husband. That's why. I was like,
it's a family show. Family stuff comes all the time.
Do not disturb. What in the world? How do I make sure that doesn't happen again?
Phone mute? I don't know.
Phone is already muted. Computer's on do not disturb, but husband gets through. You know what I'm saying? Why is he
Husband is
calling?
important. Your
Let me
phone
just
knows.
text
That's
him
why.
and be like, you alive?
No problem. But for the last few months here, it's been hard to get medication for me. The last 3 months, there's been a
Mm.
shortage, and it's been like a week or two where I haven't been able to get my meds. And I could feel that. And JJ was just, kind of razzing me over this last week because I just kept forgetting all this stuff we had scheduled, and I was just like, JJ, I haven't had my pills all week. Like how did I live 35 years of my life not able to remember information, and
Mhm.
operate in those 5 days that I notice when I don't have it and how my brain operates. Now that I have experienced what it can do for me, it's just like, wow, so yeah, I just kind of wanted to address that because it can be night and day for some people. Maybe not everybody, but it definitely wasn't my experience.
It's so wonderful. And that's exactly how it should be. And that's what I say all the time is, there's a lot of trepidation around medication, but it is supposed to give you a huge net positive. And if it doesn't, then don't take it, right? But like for most people, it is like putting on a pair of glasses for the first time or like turning down the volume on like all the things screaming at you. And I am so glad that you had that experience. And I feel for people who, try out a bunch of different medications and like nothing feels good to them. And that sucks because for me as well, medication has been absolutely life changing. And I wish that everyone had that same experience, but I know everyone is different and, everybody's reacting in different ways to it. So,
Yeah, how did that process look for you? Because
mm,
you said that it was kind of off to a rough start. And
mm,
most people that we've had on this podcast, most people with ADHD that I've talked to, the first round never seems to go well. You have to be
mm,
an advocate for yourself or for your kids. And that's definitely been our experience with our daughter. It took us about 3 different tries
yeah,
before we got to somebody that was even really kind of willing to take the time to ask deeper questions rather than just maybe a Google search and then say, no, I don't think your kid has it.
yeah. Well, that,
So I'm just kind of like
yes.
curious, how did that look like? How many, what were
Mm,
what were the initial bad feelings of the first round, and what did you have to do to kind of move
mm.
forward?
Well, I was just going to say that like boils my blood to think about clinicians who are dismissive or just not informed. And I've heard from so many psychiatrists, psychologists saying like, we're not trained in ADHD, especially ADHD for adults. So like, sure, there's like a chapter at most in a book, maybe one class, like one class period on it, but there's not a lot of learning that's happening. And like, I'm so grateful to the clinicians who do their own work and learn about the disorder so that they can help so many patients. For me personally, actually, the first round of medication was great. So I went right on Concerta and I didn't notice anything. So it took a couple appointments to like bump up the medication, but I'm pretty sure, I mean, this was 20 years ago. But I'm pretty sure the doctor said, like, you might not notice anything at first. So just like come back. Um, and yeah, it took like 3 bumps up of the medication for me to then really notice, like, okay, like this is making a very big difference. There was a change though, because I went off of medication when I was pregnant and nursing, which now we don't have to do, or at least there's studies that show that it's like totally fine. But at the time, I did go off of the medication. And when I went back to be medicated, I went back on the stimulant. And I don't know, like, I don't know if like hormones changed or what, like maybe aging or something, but I did not like being on a stimulant. It just felt terrible in my body. I was anxious. I was irritable. I couldn't sleep. I was just like, I knew after 3 days, like, I am not doing this. And because I had been on it before and it felt great and like, this is not how it's supposed to be. So then we tried out a non-stimulant and that's been fine. It's been great. I've really, it actually really calms my body down and has the opposite effect for me in a really good way.
Yeah,
Yeah, sorry, go ahead,
for
JJ.
me as a father, who basically has to speak on behalf of his child, that's been a
Mm-hmm.
trial for us.
Yeah.
The experience for us was simply we took our kiddo, had an hour-long session with a psychiatrist, and the very next session we were talking about medication. And I remember thinking, like, this kind of goes to the idea of, when we talk about the word superpower, like that kind of just basically takes the individual out of the picture and just puts a single label on them. And that's what I felt like in our experience when we were essentially getting a diagnosis. Now, I believe the diagnosis was accurate, but I didn't feel like the individual was really seen in that process. And of course, as the parent of a child who is having his ups and downs in school, just going through development, that continues to be a personal challenge for us because we want to best serve our kiddo who's, just honestly just still just going through development. So the stimulant, and we've tried, different dosages and stuff, and we're still on the path of trying to find the most success for him. But it does feel a little bit disconcerting when we go to a practitioner and they just basically say, okay, let's just try another dosage. I'm just like, well, what about my kid in this? That's where I feel like there's a disconnect a lot of the time.
Well, yeah,
I
and
totally
JJ,
feel that.
you've had experience too, where you've walked into therapist's office and tried to get a counselor or something for a little one, and they say we don't treat people with ADHD. And it's just like, what does that mean? I thought your job was to treat people. Period.
Yeah, Kristen. We moved here over a year ago, and we still don't have a behavioral therapist for our kiddo because either they're booked, which is a high demand thing. I understand that, but then the other thing that we've heard a lot is we don't treat ADHD. Well, how about treating a child who's trying to develop executive functioning skills? Because that really is what we're after here. We're after the child. We're not after the diagnosis.
Isn't that discriminatory?
Well, it certainly has felt that way, yes. But we're continuing our journey.
So.
It feels extremely discriminatory. And especially as a behavioral therapist, hello, what are we doing, people? Like this gets me so fired up because to think of a therapist saying, like, oh, I don't want to work with people with ADHD. They're essentially saying I'm a behavioral therapist who doesn't want to work with someone who has behavioral issues. Like, I prefer to not work with people with behavioral issues. Well, honey, you're a behavioral therapist. You may have gone into the wrong profession. That makes me upset. On your behalf, I'm very sorry. Like, I'm upset for you.
Well, thank you. Yeah. One of the nice things that we are currently going through is the IEP evaluation process. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of advocates in the school that he goes to. So I feel like we do have support where we'd like to see it because school is usually the place where, all your ADHD symptoms are going to come out because, we're at recess. We're having a blast. We're putting our energy out there. Oh, wait, now I'm supposed to sit in a chair and do this? Well, how am I supposed to do that? My energy's still out there. And so we are working through that process, which I'm grateful for. But yes, unfortunately, it has been a little bit of a battle the other direction.
How old is your kiddo?
He's 7.5.
Do you both have 7-year-olds?
I have an 8, 6, and 3-year-old. So I've got 3.
Oh my gosh, you are in it.
We're in it. Have you worked with kids before other than your own and your family experience with ADHD? Have you worked in that field with children?
Yeah. So I worked with kids for quite some time. I owned a learning center in my hometown. And so I worked with kiddos who struggled in school. So many of them had ADHD. And this is actually how I got started in the ADHD field because I would research ADHD in order to help my students. And as I was researching, I was like, wait, what? Excuse me, what? And realizing the symptoms, the impairments of the disorder, and how many of them were things that I thought were character flaws in myself. And this was just so eye-opening for me. And I would say also a huge piece of this was connection with the parents of the students. So I was working with these students, but I'd see the parents. It was a very intense program where they would come 4 days a week. And so I would build, significant relationships with these families. And so many of the parents would say, kind of pull me aside and say, like, I know you're working with my kid, but I think I might have ADHD. What do you recommend for me? And this is back in 2010 to 2015. I'm like, I don't know. And I didn't even know much, myself. And so I began to research on behalf of these families, just like how can I help these families? And as I learned and I had such an eye-opening experience for myself, realizing like, wow, this encompasses so much more than I ever knew. And why wasn't I ever told? And why isn't anybody talking about this? And this is right the time that podcasts started coming out. And so that's when I decided to start my podcast, just as a means for me to kind of like get it out. I just needed to talk about it. I needed to say something.
Yeah,
Because
same
I
here.
felt like
That's
no one
why
else
this
is
is here.
talking about it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great because I had that similar experience when I wanted to go get diagnosed. It's like, is adult ADHD even a thing?
Right.
It's never talked about.
Right.
You hear about kids and we're just, putting them on medications, and well, what happens when those kids grow up? They
Right.
just, you take them off the medication and just kick them out the door into the real world. What does that look like?
Mhm.
And so, there are plenty of adults out there with ADHD, and a lot of them podcast, because it's like, hello, someone give me some information out here,
It's so true. I was just looking at this for an episode that I recorded this week, and there is a gap in the diagnosis between children and adults. So there's about 8.7% of children who are diagnosed and only about 5.4% of adults diagnosed. And I think that what's happening right now in our society is that we're working to close that gap, where adults are finally having so much more information and kind of waking up to like, wait a second, I think I have ADHD. And I think that's why it might seem like, oh, everyone is saying they're diagnosed with ADHD. Like, it seems like a very trendy topic, but I think what's happening is that we have all of this access to information. So many people like you and myself who are podcasting and getting the word out there. And then we're closing that percentage gap of like, it should be equal. The number of children diagnosed and the number of adults diagnosed, there should not be a gap. And so I think what's happening is we're working to close that gap. And it was previously thought of as a childhood disorder. So that does make sense. But like, now we know better. So now we got to catch up and get these people who are just walking around thinking they're bad people. We need to get them diagnosed and treated so that they can understand what their strengths are and really understand that their weaknesses are because of a disorder, not because of character flaws.
And what does treatment look like? And what's the difference between, what does treatment look like in children versus adults? Besides the medication aspect, is there other means of treatment?
I like to say treatment because it's an all-encompassing word that the listener can interpret for themselves. And then I don't have to be on the hook for like, well, you said this would work and it didn't, or like, I don't like that you're saying medication or, right? So I'm always just like, treat it, period. But what research shows us is that medication is the best treatment for ADHD. And about 90% of humans are able to tolerate medication and see a positive impact in their lives. About 10% of humans have like an adverse reaction to it, or they just don't notice a difference. It just doesn't work for them. But for the people who are medically treated, the outcomes are so much better. So medication, in my opinion, and in science's opinion, is the foundation for treatment. But then, there's so much more. When people, how do I want to say this? There is so much more that can go into a treatment plan. The question, though, is, do you have the executive function to follow through on the other things? And that is why medication is the first line of defense. It's the first step, because for most people with ADHD, there's no way we're going to be able to stick to a regular exercise plan or a healthy diet, or even have the capacity to make a therapy appointment and show up at the right time and the right place, right? And so being able to first have that foundation of medication will usually give us enough, what's the word I'm looking for? You're going to cut this out, right? it will give us enough functioning to be able to then take the next step, whatever that might look like. For me personally, I have loved getting out into nature. It soothes my nervous system so much. And so I like to kind of, I don't know if please let me know if there's any better way to say this, but I kill several birds with one stone. Is there a better, more politically correct way to say that? I don't know. But I go for a hike.
I like the way that you hypothesized it.
Okay, great. I'm killing lots of birds with one stone.
Listen, I misuse and make up words all the time on this podcast, so you'll fit right in here.
It is so hard to be a podcaster with ADHD because you're just like, I don't know what's going to come out. You just never know, right? So I like to hike. And while I'm hiking, I'm listening to something that I'm enjoying. And I'm also like exercising and I'm getting into nature. And I'm just feeling like so many things are being accomplished right now. Maybe I'm listening to a book, or I'm listening to something that fuels my soul. And so for someone with ADHD, whatever treatment plan you choose for yourself, it has to make sense. It has to be fun. It cannot be drudgery, and it has to feel like it's worth it. I think so many of the things that we try to make ourselves do it doesn't feel worth it. And so we can do it for a day or a 2 or 3 or even a week. And then because we are just not seeing the benefit, or we just are like, this doesn't actually matter. Like that influencer said it matters, but like, it doesn't actually matter to me, even though I'm telling myself I should do it. We always are going to fall off the wagon of things that don't feel like they're worth it to us.
What are some of the common pitfalls that you see in a lot of adults untreated with ADHD?
Oh. It just breaks my heart. I think the biggest thing that we see across the board is a gigantic gap between potential and performance. Just a huge gap between someone's potential and what they would be capable of if they had treatment and support, and then where they're actually performing in their day-to-day. And I think that someone with ADHD that has not been treated, or someone that's been diagnosed, let's say at age 40, 50, 60, that looks back on their life, there's so much grief because with a diagnosis, a later diagnosis, and then treatment, and seeing how different you can be and how much better you can perform, you just look back and you say, my gosh, what would have been different if I had had this treatment and support earlier? And so the biggest pitfall, I would say, is just like the gap between potential and performance. But I mean, what the research also shows us is untreated, meaning unmedicated, ADHD can lead to a higher risk of substance misuse, divorce, car accidents, debt, job loss, major relationship issues, and incarceration.
You're dating my dating profile. You're reading my dating profile right now. I think I've checked out 9 of those 10 boxes in my life.
Yep, exactly. And you just received your diagnosis a year ago, right? And so like, it's almost like, my gosh, how much damage can be done in 30 or 40 or 50 years? A lot. And so then you finally get that diagnosis, and it's like, so many people feel like they're making up for lost time. Like I have so many wrongs to right, so to speak, and I need to make up for lost time. And that's one of the main things that I work on with my later diagnosis clients, is like, what really needs to happen is grief. There's just so much grief that needs to be felt because, like, this is really unfair that you weren't diagnosed, and like now but you can't change the past. And so we just have to sit with like the loss of what could have been. But it's never too late. It is never too late to get a diagnosis, to be treated, and to make a change. I would encourage a 70-year-old, 80-year-old, 90-year-old. I don't care. Like, I wish that my grandmother, would have had the privilege of just knowing like, oh, I'm not a failure. I have ADHD, even if she didn't choose to treat it. Like when I think about like especially women, but like, I just think that when we think about ADHD being hereditary. It's as inheritable as height. So like dad's tall, you're probably going to be tall, right? Dad has ADHD, you're going to probably have ADHD. And it works the same way. So like if somebody listening is like, well, my kid has ADHD, but I don't, I would just maybe look into that. Like, does your partner? Because one of you does, right? So let's just look into that. Anyway, thinking about the people in our lives who came before us who didn't have the privilege of knowing, like, oh, you're not a bad person. This is actually something that's different in your brain that can be shaped and worked with. Yeah, again, all the emotions with that.
Yeah, one of the episodes of your podcast that I really enjoyed was kind of talking about these pitfalls, and another one was about, how ADHD it shows up as generational trauma for a lot of us, right? As in the sense, like, our parents never got diagnosed, they never got these skills, they don't have that frontline defense of chemical balance in the brain, so they probably reacted impulsively and without emotional regulation, which caused some traumatic events for a lot of children, and then we grow up having those same displays of behavior. And the episode, you went into the most recent episode you had on your podcast was, stop saying that, ADHD is a superpower. And like I said, I went into it like, what is she talking about? Oh my goodness, we're going to have her on the podcast. I'm going to tear apart. But the more I listened to that, and then, I went back to your previous episodes to listen to kind of some of the pitfalls. And I just, every time I wanted to come back with a boxing right hook of defense, I was like, dang, but I did do that. I have done that in my life. Oh man, that is a pattern in my life. And there aren't a lot of times where I've felt like ADHD is a superpower. Like maybe it's a story I tell myself to like cope with, calm down, be okay with it. But, and sometimes I do feel like that, when I'm in the very rare, unique circumstance of being able to hyper focus alone, and there's not 3 kids running in trying to distract me from that, because, pulling out of hyper focus is hard, and my emotional regulation goes out the window. I'm like tunnel vision. And if you come, Coley, I need this or something, I'm like, just growl real quick, and I hate that about myself, that I can't smoothly transition, which I feel is the superpower of a parent. You need to be able to pivot on a dime's moment. That's what makes a killer parent to me, is whatever chaos is going on, you can let your own shit go and just be present with it, and as I've gone along my parenting journey, I see that those two things conflict. My superpower in my ADHD is my quote unquote hyper focus. Yeah. And my superpower in my parenting is my presence and my ability to kick the hyper focus out the door and focus on the now. So I've really seen some of those destructive patterns of impulse control show up in my life and in my workplace, in my relationships and my finances. And, I'm 6 years sober now, but before those 6 years of sobriety was a cocaine addiction. Yeah. And I think a lot of that was fueled from my parents' apprehension to medication and not understanding that. And cocaine was the only drug that was like, I need to have this. Alcohol and pot and all of these other things were like, I can do without. But the meth connection to the dopamine and the chemical, I finally felt like my brain is or my body and my brain are finally operating at the same speed. Mm-hmm. Where before it felt exhausting that my brain was going through this treadmill on hyper speed and my body was just like, I can't keep up. I feel exhausted. You've just thought like 1,000 things in the last 2 minutes. Like, and cocaine was something for me that was like, we're operating on all cylinders now. And I was probably a bubbling mess, twitchy and sweaty and talking a mile a minute, but internally I felt this connection of like, oh, I need this, mm-hmm. And it took a lot of, self work and internal work, reflection and grieving, like you say, mm-hmm. of going through that sobriety process. And then opening myself up and being curious to medicine, right? Because it's like, as a recovering addict, I'm like, oh, do I want to, like, it has meth in the title, do I want to even like go down that
Right.
road, like, what is that going to look like, but
Yeah.
like talking with a psychiatrist in a controlled environment, having the support groups and the information and tools at my disposal has really helped arm me and really helped me understand my body, my tendencies, my
Mm.
reactions, and how this thing can help or detriment my progress. So having all of those things like at the forefront and aware of those has really been empowering to me. Again, I'm not advocating for or not for medicine. I think that there are dangers of it. Again, being an addict myself, I know that this is a drug that does have addictional properties to it. But I think that if we are open to conversations, research, information, and discussions, it could be a really powerful tool to help combat some of these impulse things that, when you're a kid and you're having ADHD tendencies in the classroom, it's like, well, Billy's just a little hype. He was hyper today. Give him his medicine tomorrow and we'll have a
Right.
better day. But when you're an adult, it's like you lose a
Right.
fucking job. You get divorced and you lose a marriage, and you blow through a savings account on an impulse decision. They're big consequences, so it's not only important to coach our kids through that, but especially if you're later in life undiagnosed or
Yeah.
untreated or unaware of what's going on. I think it's so valuable to have a coach like you
Mm.
that can really be that support system and help kind of put things into perspective for somebody that is so new to this process and
Mm.
overwhelmed by all the information and scared and unsure.
Yeah. I'm so curious to ask you, what was your experience like taking medication? Were there any similarities to how you felt when you were using cocaine, where you were kind of like now operating at the same speed? Because I think that's something that people actually do say to describe what it's like for them taking ADHD medication. And I'm just curious if it felt in any way the same.
It does. It
Yeah.
does. And I'll be a little honest that when I first took the medicine, and I was similar to you, where we kind of had to up my dosage like 3 different times. I was like,
Yeah.
I'm not really feeling any different here,
Yeah.
and it took like 3 months before we were able to, wow, I feel really like, God, I haven't gotten up and did my pacing for 15 minutes in the
Yeah.
middle of this project, or gone on Google for half an hour and burned my day, so. But I did feel those similarities, and it was again a conversation that I had to check in with myself and say, like, you be aware of this,
Mm-hmm.
like, but again, in a controlled pill form, feels a lot safer to me than something that you
100%.
you stick a key into and
Yeah. And I think the whole point is that, um, when we are treated properly, medically treated for ADHD, there is not then the need to go out and seek out something else to make us feel
Yes.
aligned, to make us
Yes.
feel like we're operating at the same speed, brain and body. And I'm 99% positive that there is research to show that while there are addictive properties to stimulant medication, it's actually not addictive for people who have ADHD. That's the whole point, is that people who have ADHD actually need it to feel balanced. People who don't have ADHD, yeah, don't be snorting it. Like, it's not smart. Let's not crush up the Adderall. That's not a good idea. But people who do have ADHD, it's actually going to lower our desire, our need, the compelling nature of like, I need something else outside of me to make me feel better. Because the ADHD medication is then it's stabilizing us internally. I'm so grateful. I'm so thankful that you shared that.
Well, yeah, I
I
listened. One of your podcasts was about, overuse of pot and
know.
the connection with ADHD, and I found that interesting too. And a lot of the stuff that your guest was talking about there about, the need for escapism,
Yeah.
and the need of like to escape the discomfort
Yeah.
of like that exhaustion that I described earlier, of like, God, my brain is so many things, but my body just feels like it can't keep up. And,
Mhm.
that disconnect is really tiresome, and you
Yes.
do want to escape that. And,
Yeah.
and pot is a way of like, well, if I can't bring the body up, I'll bring the brain down, and that escapes. It's a balancing out,
Mm.
and when I went through my sobriety journey, they say that your problem isn't that you like drugs. Your problem is that you don't like being sober. You have a
Yes. Oh my
hard
gosh.
time sitting with yourself
Yeah.
and your experience. How do we work through that? That's the issue. It's not stay away from the cocaine, because cocaine is always going to fucking show up, right?
Right.
Like someone's
Right.
always going to be in a bathroom or somewhat,
Yeah.
it's at some point it'll come into your life again, and you can't avoid
Mhm.
it. It's out there in the world. Just because you're not doing the drug doesn't mean that drug doesn't exist,
Yeah.
So you have to be okay with who you are and the sobriety and those challenging situations.
Mm.
So at first that became like a addiction to me. Was like, all right, sobriety is the thing I'm addicted to. Like, we gotta go. As an ADHD person, we're going full in, and I love it. I'm addicted to it, just like meditation, journaling, whatever I can do to just like grow, and thank God I did, because if you're gonna be addicted to something, why not self growth, But like you said, when everything is balanced, it cuts out the need for like I need to escape this
Yep.
terrible feeling. Things are good. I feel great. Let's do
Yeah.
what needs to be done next. And so
Yeah. And I think that this circles back beautifully to the childhood trauma conversation, because when I do see in myself and clients who are being medically treated for ADHD, when there's still that desire for something outside of myself, that's when I need to look at like what happened to me that is making it hard for me to even like sit with these emotions now. And I think that, as we learn more about trauma and its impact on ADHD, I'm so excited about the conversations that are happening now. And I don't know if you saw Dr. Barkley put out a video recently on YouTube, like quote unquote debunking Gabor Mate's claims that ADHD is all caused by trauma. And I just love it. First of all, I love a good duel, right? Like, who doesn't love a sword fight? It's great. And then also, I just love that we're having these conversations. I am thinking that the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. Is it nature? Is it nurture? It's probably both. That's my assumption. But I just love that we're having these conversations about trauma and its impact on the brain and its impact on like generations and families, and how we can just kind of like point to things in our own families. And I think that as we are learning more about what's appropriate behavior, even in families, like what was appropriate 30 years ago, even is not seen as appropriate now, and then even like 60 years ago. And so being able to have these conversations and kind of like revamp how we're treating people and humans and kids, like I just love all of it. I think it is just a really wonderful time to be alive. That's what I think. It's a great time to be alive.
Well, I want to hear about this superpower thing, because I tried explaining it to my wife. She did not get it. She was
sorry.
She was very defensive about it, and I think a lot of people, maybe they hear that, maybe will be, because honestly, I think you're the first person that I've heard say that. Every textbook and podcast that I've listened to is telling me, turn ADHD into a superpower.
I do have a quick thought on that too, and I think the reason is because a lot of us, like we know somebody or we ourselves have, a diagnosis, and then that becomes a very personal thing for us, and we want to find the good in the people we love, and of course ourselves as well. So, well, take for example, I know you mentioned the Holderness family, Penn and his wife, they were on The Amazing Race, and he specifically said it's like a superpower. And when you hear somebody say that and you see them finding success, you're like, oh, my kiddo has ADHD. what's going on with him that's really waiting to come out and show its success and strength. So what I equate that to is we are trying to put a blanket statement on somebody because we are not quite familiar yet, but we have so much empathy for and love for this person that it's easy to say, okay, there's something within them because they share this similarity with somebody else. I'm waiting for that to really show itself. And then when it's going to show itself, it's going to just take off. It's going to be brilliant. And I'm so excited to cheer for that. Or maybe they're cheering for that now. And instead of saying, they're a great artist, they're saying they have a superpower, they have ADHD and their superpower is taken off and stuff. So I think that's kind of where that gets a little bit muddied. And I appreciate people getting on board with their loved ones and really trying to help them succeed in life. And maybe it's just the way we word it, the way we talk about it is a little bit in a way of misdirection and getting back on point of talking. Like, I love talking about the individual. What is so great about this person?
Yes.
What is so great about because, everybody who has if we all get diagnosed with the same thing, we're still individuals walking through this life, expressing our individuality. And that's what I love to promote. So I think that's kind of where I come at with it. And the idea of the superpower to me is a way to essentially, I don't know, maybe bridge the gap because I'm still trying to develop my empathy and full understanding of my 7.5-year-old who, by the way, yesterday, his mom forgot to give him his medication. He had a rough day. His aftercare teacher said, yeah, he was a little wired all day. And and then he tells me, like, I didn't have my medicine today. So he was already identifying in himself something that basically suggested, the parts of me that are struggling were amplified today because I didn't get my medication. So my superpower didn't come out in the way it needed to come out in this environment. So I think there's this journey of self-discovery that takes place. And sometimes it feels good for people to say, okay, I have this. This is a way for me to move forward with some confidence, or this is a way for me to move forward because I'm not quite sure right now and I need some comfort in the process.
I think you put that so beautifully. And I completely agree with you. I think that the superpower conversation is very, very well-intentioned. It's very well-intentioned. And I am on board with good intentions. I love it. Like, let's always celebrate good intentions. That's a very good thing.
But the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Let's also remember that.
Thank you for bringing some reality into this conversation. I appreciate it. Okay, I have so many things that I want to say. Did you watch that episode of The Amazing Race with Penn and Kim? And when he was talking about his ADHD. And
I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
We just watched it recently. So my husband and I have been binge watching Survivor and The Amazing Race, alternating
I love both those shows.
between the two.
JJ wants to get on Survivor.
It is so great. And I was enraged when he was talking about ADHD as his superpower. And here is why. For the listener who has not seen the show, they were doing a challenge and he was having to remember. He was having to listen and then listen to somebody talk and then remember things from that.
An ADHDer's worst nightmare.
Thank you. And that is exactly my point. So the skill that he was using was nonverbal working memory, right? And then also auditory processing. Those are two things that are often very deficient for people with ADHD. Now, of course, it's a spectrum and all of us are going to have different strengths and different weaknesses. But in general, working memory and nonverbal working memory specifically, which is your ability to picture something in your mind's eye. And he said specifically, I can picture things in my mind because I have ADHD. No. Actually, most people with ADHD struggle to picture anything in their mind's eye. So this is where it just gets dicey for me because somebody who's very famous on a show that's watched by millions is actually giving misinformation. And then exactly what you said, JJ, where people are looking and saying, well, I can't do that. So what does that mean about me? What does that mean about my ADHD? How come Penn is succeeding and I'm not succeeding? What's going on? If ADHD is a superpower and that is the similarity between Penn and myself, why isn't it treating me the way that it's treating Penn? Why are we so different? And so what I want to say is every human has superpowers. Every single human. And our job as if we're talking about parents, our job is to look at our kiddos and say, what are my kids' strengths? What can I see in them and encourage? What can I call out in them and say, look at what you just did. That was amazing. I've never seen anybody do it that way. I have one kiddo, my youngest. He feels emotions so deeply. And I will say to him, you have an incredible gift to feel deep emotions. And we'll talk about that. Like, it's incredible that you do this better than anyone else that I know. He feels other people's pain. If someone else is sad, he starts crying, and he hates it about himself because it's hard. It makes his life hard, but that is a beautiful gift, right? And so it's my job to see the gift and then to help him to shape it and use it and not become a doormat someday because he's feeling everyone's emotions. And we're going to work on that. But the point is, each individual has gifts and superpowers. Why do we have to delegate the goodness about someone to a diagnosis of ADHD? Why do I have to say, oh, it's ADHD that is a superpower? Oh, you're cool because you have ADHD, or you're creative because you have. No, you're creative because you're creative, and that's awesome. But it's not. I always say, like, don't delegate your badassery to ADHD. Don't give it credit for like how amazing you are. You take credit for it. You're amazing. Like, take credit for that. You got me fired up on this whole episode. I'm not usually. Well,
I like it. Yeah,
I am usually fired
you're
up.
bouncing in your seat there.
I guess one thing that I would just challenge anybody who might have a mindset that way is to say, okay, describe your child. And if they came back to you and says, my child has ADHD, so they are awesome, you'd be like, doesn't sound like a parent who's really showing a lot of love and attention to detail of what their kid is all about and who their kid really is. Yes.
And don't we all want to be seen for the things that make us an individual and the things that we care about and the things that, like, our quirks and our, just like all of the little things. So if we can look at our kids and see them, I see you. Like, I see what you're doing there. That's so cool. Or even though you're messing this up and this is like a total shit show, I still see that you had good intentions, right? Like, you're bouncing off the walls, but I see that you're trying to do a good thing here. Like, you made a whole mess of the kitchen, but I can see that you just wanted to make breakfast. That's great. Great job. Let's tweak how we're going to do that next time. Right. I think that, I think that we have good intentions with really wanting to make sure that our kids don't feel stigmatized, really wanting to make sure that our kids don't feel like defeated or that there's not a hope or a future for them. And I think that as parents, what we can give them is the gift of validation. I know that you are struggling and I know exactly why, and it's not your fault. I know that this is hard for you and I know exactly why, and it's not your fault. It's not because there's something wrong with you. It's because your brain is working differently. And so we're going to help you with that. But what we're not going to do is say, don't be sad about having ADHD. ADHD is a superpower. Like, I am totally fine with being like, yeah, it kind of sucks, doesn't it? Like, we're going to take care of you, but it does make life harder. I think the point, though, is holding the space for this is hard, and I am willing to be here with you in your pain. You're allowed to feel upset. You're allowed to feel pain, and I'm going to be here with you, and I'm going to support you and make it easier for you. So I have a plan. Don't worry. I'm the parent. I've got a plan. And we're going to make sure that your gifts and all of the amazing things about you are able to be seen, because we're not going to let ADHD stand in the way of any of it.
I love that. I totally agree with all of that. And, you know, like I said, I was pretty defensive when I first heard you say that, but the more I listen to it, I really do think that you're right. And, you know, sometimes as good intentioned as it may be, as parents, we want to fix. We don't want our children to hurt or be sad, or especially for something that is out of their control. That's an imbalance in their brain. We don't want to shame them for that. So you just want to jump in there and say, "Oh no, it's good, rather than like, you know. And when I first started using that, it was really early into our diagnosis with my little one. And my little one, we've gone more away from an ADHD diagnosis and more towards an autism that displays itself as ADHD and ODD, which oppositional defiance. She's very lawyer mentality. Very. The first two words out of her mouth when you tell her something are no, but,
Oh, I love
and
it.
so we
Super easy kiddo to parent.
Yeah. So but she's very good at drawing, and her teachers have known even before the evaluation, just let Naomi draw. She retains way more information if you give her a coloring book, and she can just get in there. And when you do ask her, she pops right up. She knows the answer. She leads her class straight A's. She's very, very smart. But if you take the coloring book away, it's disruption, it's fidgeting, it's, not listening, it's all over the place. So, when we're like, what is ADHD? And she's kind of battling with that. Is this good? Is this bad? Is it hurting me? Are people gonna make fun of me for it? We're trying to spin it positively. Like, no, look how creative. That's your superpower with it, is you're so creative with it. And as we've both gone on this journey over the last year and a half, I've noticed some things about myself that, my superpowers are also my kryptonites. In one situation, my superpower is great. And in another situation, it kind of inhibits me and it can be disruptive to my brain. And I notice that with my daughter a lot. Her thing is that no, but she's, if she thinks you're wrong, she'll tell you, no, but you're, but I know this. And people, what person likes that in a friend? You don't want to be told you're wrong all the time. So she struggles a lot with it, and she doesn't understand. The more that we try to get her to, about empathy is a very big thing in our household. Getting her to understand that is very difficult for a neurodivergent child with autism, so we have to be delicate about that. But I think that this is also something that will serve her great in life if she can learn how to use this and harness this. When she's an adult, I ain't going to worry about this kid getting stepped on or taken advantage by any man or corporation or anybody. She ain't going to let it happen. She is strong and she is independent and she ain't going to take no shit. And that'll be a very big superpower of hers. But, especially during this time in development, and what I also can relate to this in my, 20s, I was a mess of not understanding myself or existentialism or where I fit in or what my behaviors really said about me and who I wanted to be out internally versus what I was projecting externally. All that was a mess because I didn't have anybody to kind of help me understand it. And I think that is really like our job as parents. So I want to push back in a way of like saying that, like, you're absolutely right. ADHD is not a superpower. It's hard. It's difficult. And, it has its own set of challenges. But I think that if we can be proactive in our approach to understanding that and strategizing on how to structure that and organize that it is a superpower in the sense that our brains work differently. We are different. We are the unique population that gets to operate in our chemical imbalance to see the world differently. And I think that is a superpower as much as it is a detriment and obstacle to get around. It just depends on what life skills we have to look at it in what way. Is this something that can harm us and is going to be detrimental, or is this something that is all good all the time? No, it's in the middle, and it's where you're at, and how can you recognize these traits about yourself in those moments to say, oh shoot, I'm doing that ADHD thing again, or I did that again. We got a what do I know about this? What do I know about myself? What are some strategies I know? But if you don't have that, God, you're just going to make a mess of it.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I will be the first person to say that people with ADHD can do amazing things. And we see that all over the place, which I think is partially why people do kind of put forth the superpower. Wow, words. Hard. Words are real hard right now. I think that because we can see so many people in the media, in, celebrities and in tech and all of those spaces and say like, well, look at what they can do. And I think that the point is, when we have the privilege of a diagnosis and the immense privilege of being able to treat it, and then even more privilege of having money and time and access to support from, maybe an assistant. Like, my life has changed because I get to work with assistants now. Like, hello, I don't have to do any of the stupid crap that I never wanted to do. So like, I look like a superwoman. If I didn't have those supports though, it would be real bad, right? So like, when we have the ability to treat it, to support it, and to lean on others, and especially when we're in safe relationships with people who are accepting of us and who are loving and who are just like, think we're adorable because I put the eggs in the pantry this morning. I just like walked him over. And my husband was getting ready and I walked out of the pantry with the eggs and I was like, well, those don't go in there. And he's just like, you're so cute. Like when we're not being,
I just put the olive oil in the fridge the other day. So I'm right there with you.
It's so relatable. You're just like, eggs in the pantry. And I'm like, oh, those don't go in there. But when you're living with someone who is going to demean you for that, then that's detrimental. But if you're living with somebody who's like, you're so cute, then that's great, right? And so I think it just really depends on how much privilege and access and how safe our relationships are. And when we have all of that, like, it's like the Power Rangers, like with our powers combined, like, yeah. Oh, am I too old? You guys, Power Rangers? No?
Please, I'm right there with you. All right, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Come on.
Are you sure?
I do all of them.
I was like, I am sensing dead.
All the I had all the transformable toys and it's my
Teenage
jam.
Ninja Turtles. Yeah.
I love it. I really want to create like some sort of GIF or meme around like the Power Rangers, because truly, like, that's when you can say like, great, like it's all come together. But for the majority of the world, that's not the case. And so that's where my heart breaks, is like telling someone who doesn't have access to all the things, who's maybe living in an abusive family, like, no, your ADHD is awesome. It's like, no, it's really, I think we just have to take into consideration. But like, yeah, can we do amazing things? Yeah. You guys are proof of that. I feel like I'm proof of that. But it sure does take some work, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. This has been a great conversation, Kristen. Thank you so much for doing this.
It was my pleasure. I love it.
Before we go, can you let our listeners know where they can find you or reach out to you, or if you've got anything exciting coming up, let us know about it.
Sure. You can listen to my free podcast, the I Have ADHD podcast, and I have a coaching program called Focused, and you can visit my website, I Have ADHD, to learn more about that. And I hang out on Instagram at I Have ADHD podcast. I just started a TikTok, but I am way behind the times. I'm just like an old grandma on TikTok right now.
Hey, when I saw that you got IHaveADHD.com, I'm in digital marketing. I thought, oh, wow, she was on top of it. So trust me, you are doing all right.
Thank you so much. There are just a few people who have said the same thing, and it always like warms my heart because, 2018 me, who was like, I think that I should buy this web domain. I think it costs like $2,500. Like, it was way more money than I didn't just like have it lying around, but I was like, I think this is worth putting on a credit card. And I did. And I was so glad I did. It was a really good decision. Yeah, it's good.
Well, not to worry, guys. We'll have all that information in the show notes for you, so you can check out Kristen's stuff or reach out to her, or check out Focused if you're interested in that program, which sounds awesome, man. I might be one of your clients, honestly. It sounds pretty cool. Because that was honestly one of the first questions when I got my diagnosis was like, okay, well, what now? Like I'm going to go fill the prescription, but like, oh, do I like, get an occupational behavioral therapist like my daughter is recommended to, or like, what does that look like as an adult? So, I'm really, I'm glad that you and JJ and I and the other coaches out there, that do this work, because honestly, it's been one of the most life-changing things in me, to invest in myself. And the return on it has been great, emotionally, behaviorally, in my relationships and my job. So, if you're on the fence about it, hit up Kristen, check out the ADHD dads, get with it. Cause it is worth it, guys. Really, like you have to have the dedication and passion and want to help yourself. And if you don't have this great, Megatron Power Ranger mashup support system that we're talking about here, the first place that you should start with is yourself, and the other pieces will fall into place. I promise you. Throughout that journey, I knew nothing. And now I feel like I have an unbelievable network of support that I can fall back on, that I can lean on, that I can ask questions to. And without that, my life would probably still be a mess. So thank you for doing what you do, Kristen. I really appreciate you coming on here.
Thanks for having me. This is really fun.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for listening, and we hope to have you back next week. We'll see you next time. I'm your host, CJ.
I'm JJ.
And this is Kristen. Say it. Wait, we haven't had a guest do their own outro. Let's do it. I know you did. I felt bad. I stepped on your shoes. Okay, let's do it. This is the ADHD Dads. I'm CJ.
I'm JJ.
And I'm Kristen Carter.
Thanks for listening, guys. See you next time.
Bye.